Methuselah, high in California's White Mountains, clinging to a windswept limestone slope above 10,000 feet, grows a Great Basin bristlecone pine that had already been alive for centuries before the Egyptian pyramids were built. Named Methuselah after the Bible's longest-lived figure, the tree was cored and dated in 1957 by dendrochronologist Edmund Schulman, who counted its growth rings back to a germination date of roughly 2833 BC, making it approximately 4,856 years old. The United States Forest Service deliberately keeps the tree's exact location secret within the ancient bristlecone pine forest, refusing to mark or point it out even to visitors walking the trail that passes directly through its grove, a precaution against vandalism and souvenir hunters. Bristlecone pines achieve that extraordinary lifespan by growing almost impossibly slowly in harsh, nutrient-poor soil at high elevation, conserving energy so aggressively that individual needle clusters can remain attached to a branch for up to 45 years, a record among all conifer species. In 2026, researchers finally sequenced the complete bristlecone pine genome, discovering it carries roughly 10 times more DNA than a human does, padded with ancient repetitive sequences that scientists believe may hold genuine clues to how a single organism keeps dividing healthy cells for 5,000 consecutive years. That same tree ring record has proven scientifically valuable far beyond simple age counting, since bristlecone data now helps calibrate radiocarbon dating itself, giving researchers a known age reference point stretching back thousands of years for correcting fluctuations in atmospheric carbon levels. Prometheus. In 1964, a graduate student researching climate history in Nevada's Wheeler Peak area selected a bristlecone pine for sampling, and after his coring tool broke inside the trunk, park officials authorized cutting the entire tree down to retrieve a usable cross-section. Only after the tree lay felled did researchers count its rings and realize what had actually happened. The tree, later named Prometheus, was approximately 4,900 years old, meaning it had very likely been older than Methuselah, making it possibly the oldest tree ever definitively documented and killed in the same act of discovery. Every entry on this list represents a genuinely different record, a different survival strategy, or in this single tragic case, a different kind of warning. And Garden's lab keeps tracking down ancient organisms exactly like these, with a new deep dive posted every few days into lifespans that stretch the limits of what most people assume is even possible. The loss of Prometheus sent a shockwave through the scientific and conservation community, directly leading to stricter permitting requirements and far more cautious sampling protocols before any similarly ancient tree could ever be cored or cut again. A cross-section of the felled trunk remains preserved today, a physical record of nearly 5,000 rings that visitors can still examine, standing as a permanent reminder of a record that was only discovered the moment it was destroyed. Gran Abuelo, sheltered in a cool, damp ravine in Chile's Alerce Costero National Park. A massive Patagonian cypress known as Gran Abuelo, meaning great-grandfather, has survived the fires and logging that claimed most of its kind across southern Chile and Argentina. Chilean climate scientist Jonathan Barishevich, whose own grandfather first showed him the tree as a child, used a non-destructive coring method in 2020 to sample the trunk, though the tool could not reach the tree's full 4-meter diameter, leaving a portion of its growth rings physically uncountable. Barishevich developed a statistical model to estimate the missing rings, arriving at an age of roughly 5,484 years, with an 80% probability the tree has lived past 5,000 years, a figure that would make Gran Abuelo several centuries older than Methuselah if fully confirmed, because that age relies partly on modeling rather than a complete physical ring count. The scientific community has not universally accepted Gran Abuelo as the definitive record holder, leaving the title of world's oldest tree in a genuinely unresolved state. Regardless of where the final scientific consensus lands, the tree has become a powerful symbol of conservation in Chile, drawing global attention to a species now considered the most endangered conifer in the entire country. The genus itself carries deep cultural roots in the region as well, known locally as alirse, and long used by indigenous Mapuche communities for its rot-resistant timber, a resource that made the species a prized target for logging long before its extraordinary age was ever suspected. The Llangernyw Yew, standing in the small churchyard of St. Degane's Church in a rural Welsh village, this ancient yew has fragmented so completely over the millennia that its original central trunk has entirely disappeared, leaving several massive, separate offshoots that now appear almost like distinct trees growing from the same spot. Experts estimate its age at somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 years, a range so old the tree would have already been well established during the same Bronze Age period that produced Stonehenge. Yew trees prove notoriously difficult to date precisely, since their core wood typically rots away and disappears long before the surrounding growth has a chance to preserve a complete ring record, leaving researchers to rely on girth measurements and comparative growth models instead of a definitive count. Deeply woven into local Welsh folklore, the tree is said to be home to a spirit called Angelistore, who supposedly appears each Halloween to announce the names of villagers destined to die within the coming year. Despite that eerie legend, the tree remains a living, actively growing part of the churchyard today, its scattered offshoots continuing to produce fresh green growth even as its true center vanished long before recorded history began. Sarv-e Abarkuh. Rising from the arid landscape of Iran's Yazd province, this Mediterranean cypress stands as the likely oldest living organism found anywhere across the entire continent of Asia, estimated at somewhere between 4,000 and 4,500 years old. Local legend credits the tree's planting directly to Zoroaster, the founder of the Zoroastrian religion, who supposedly stopped in the town of Abarkuh on a journey and planted the sapling himself, a story that has helped elevate the tree to the status of a protected national monument. Standing 25 meters tall with a trunk perimeter stretching over 11 meters, the cypress has survived millennia of shifting empires, religions, and climate in a region that has seen relatively little consistent rainfall for most of recorded history. Iran's Cultural Heritage Organization now formally protects the tree as a natural monument, treating it as both a botanical treasure and a genuine piece of the nation's cultural identity stretching back to its pre-Islamic Zoroastrian roots. Its perimeter, measured at over 18 meters higher up around the branches, makes the tree a genuine landmark visible from a considerable distance across the surrounding town. Unlike many other ancient trees on this list hidden away in remote wilderness, Sarv-e Abarkuh stands directly within an active town, having watched the settlement grow and change around it for what may be well over 4,000 consecutive years. Jomon Sugi, deep within the mountain forests of Yakushima, a small Japanese island now recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, stands the largest and oldest Japanese cedar ever documented, its precise age still debated anywhere between 2,000 and 7,200 years, depending on which dating method researchers apply. Loggers likely passed directly by the tree for centuries without recognizing its significance, since its unusually irregular, gnarled trunk shape made it commercially undesirable for lumber, an accident of bad shape that almost certainly saved the tree from the same logging pressure that claimed so many of its straighter neighbors. Officially rediscovered and identified in 1966, the tree takes its name from Japan's prehistoric Jomon period, and its designation helped trigger stronger forest protections that eventually elevated the entire island to UNESCO status in 1993. Standing over 25 meters tall with a trunk circumference exceeding 16 meters, Jomon Sugi now serves as the centerpiece of an arduous hiking trail that draws visitors willing to trek 8 to 10 hours round trip specifically to stand before it. The tree's massive canopy hosts an entire secondary ecosystem, supporting more than 20 documented species of epiphytic plants growing directly on its ancient branches, essentially functioning as its own miniature, elevated forest. Old Tjikko. On a windswept Swedish mountainside, a modest-looking Norway spruce, standing barely 5 meters tall, conceals a root system that has been continuously alive for approximately 9,550 years, making it dramatically older than any single tree trunk could ever survive on its own. The visible trunk itself only lives for a few centuries at a time before dying back, but the underground root system survives that cycle indefinitely, sending up an entirely new genetically identical trunk to replace the old one through a process called vegetative cloning. Discovered in 2004 by a geography professor conducting research on tree line shifts, the tree was named after his recently deceased dog, and its true age only became clear once researchers carbon-dated organic root material preserved directly beneath the visible plant. That ancient root system survived the entire retreat of the last ice age, meaning old Tjikko's living connection to the landscape stretches back to a time when much of what is now the North Sea was still exposed, forested land rather than open ocean. Harsh alpine conditions kept the tree stunted into a low, shrub-like bonsai form for most of its existence, and only in recent decades of warming temperatures has it finally begun growing into something resembling a normal, upright spruce tree shape. That gradual shift in growth form, driven directly by a changing climate, offers researchers a rare living record of environmental change written not in tree rings but in the very shape of the plant itself. King's Holly. Deep in a remote pocket of southwestern Tasmania's rainforest, a rare flowering shrub called King's Holly has been cloning itself continuously for an estimated 43,600 years, making it very likely the oldest living plant clone ever documented anywhere on Earth. Every single plant in its entire population, confined to just over a square kilometer of wilderness, shares completely identical genetics, since the species carries 3 sets of chromosomes rather than the usual 2, rendering it permanently sterile and utterly incapable of reproducing through seed. New stems instead sprout continuously from spreading underground rhizomes, and when researchers compared a fossilized leaf fragment found nearby, dated to 43,600 years old, against the genetics of the living plants today, the match was essentially perfect. First discovered by a tin miner in 1934 who happened to also be an amateur naturalist, the species remained scientifically unrecognized for decades until botanists finally confirmed it as an entirely new species in the late 1960s. Despite surviving multiple ice ages and tens of thousands of years of continuous climate change, King's Holly remains critically endangered today, its entire global population numbering only a few hundred stems clustered in one single fire-vulnerable patch of Tasmanian wilderness. Attempts to establish safeguard populations in cultivation have repeatedly struggled, since the plant reacts badly to any disturbance of its roots, meaning conservationists have found this ancient survivor of ice ages and shifting continents surprisingly fragile the moment humans try to move or replant it anywhere else.